world was once a vastly different place. To experience this won't hurt you, and there is nothing to fear. Amongst the most terrifying figures of Greek mythology were the monstrous Gorgons. The Gorgon idea emerged as an overarching symbol of terror wherever its influence reached. Most modern treatments of the subject imply that there were 3 Gorgons, but the historical evidence makes clear that only one was known more anciently, the Gorgo, one goddess with a threefold aspect. Today it's commonly recognized that the Gorgon triad was originally indistinguishable from another well-known triad called the Graeae, described as 3 goddesses sharing a single eye. That's a clue and surely no coincidence. In the popular telling of the Gorgon story, only one figure stands out, and that is the terrifying Medusa. Artists and poets depicted Medusa's disordered hair as a tangle of snakes. Well, that's a clue too, because the image of snaky locks is just too close to the wildly disheveled hair of the archetypal angry goddess. But what was meant by the goddess's threefold aspect? That root form is no accident either, no random turn in the evolution of mythic symbolism. It points directly back to the archetypal triangular form of the so-called triple goddess, discussed in previous discourses. Seen in its historical context, the image takes us back to the visual appearance of the planet Venus in the polar configuration, more specifically the emergence of the archaic goddess from the triangular seed of creation itself. To understand the theme, we need only envision Venus and its concrete, central relationship to the massive sphere of the primeval sun, meaning in the early astronomical traditions, the planet Saturn. In following the evolution of the goddess image over time, we find that lovely and terrible aspects of one mythic archetype were progressively transformed into 2 separately named personalities. By this evolutionary process occurring across many centuries, the triple goddess and her terrible aspect emerged as a quasi-independent symbol of fear and destruction. But when we trace the theme back to its origins, we meet Medusa's archaic connection to a far-famed personality, Athena, a connection now widely acknowledged in comparative studies. There is good reason why we see the head of Medusa in the center of the very aegis or shield with which Athena herself was so closely identified. Then suddenly Athena's critical role in the story makes perfect sense. When the poets declared that it was Athena who placed the Medusa head in the center of her own aegis, that helped to maintain a distinction of the goddess from her own terrible aspect. Let the friendly and unfriendly faces of the goddess stand in opposition to each other, as if they signified independent forces. Not surprisingly, we see the same Gorgon head in the center of the shield of Heracles, and in shield symbolism more generally. That is how the terrible goddess came to stand as the great protectress, placed in the service of the archetypal warrior hero. The same idea stands out in the placement of the Medusa head over the entrances to temples, underscoring the angry goddess's original function as protectress. As we've seen in earlier discourses, this was nothing else than the terrifying glory, or face of glory, celebrated as the great protectress amongst neighboring cultures, with precisely the same protective function. As should be expected, the tangled hair easily merged with other symbols of the planet Venus's cometary aspect. For instance, the improbably bearded form of the Graeae, of which Medusa was a mere variant. The incongruous beard was an explicit ancient symbol for the comet. Most obvious parallels were the bearded Greek goddess Aphrodite and her counterpart, the bearded Latin Venus, Venus Barbata. conveying precisely the same meaning. Such images were part of the progressive separation of the goddess's ugly or terrifying aspect from her lovely aspect. As in all cases that we've previously explored, the explanation lies in the underlying identity of the mother goddess, tracing to a time before the personality split, as we've seen in all of the goddess's more archaic forms. One archetypal goddess, simultaneously displaying both the lovely and the terrible aspects in one story. And so the question, how significant is it that not a single word from specialists have ever been offered as a plausible explanation for the dilemma, either for the personality split in general or for the Medusa theme in particular? Not surprisingly, the legends declared that Medusa was originally a beautiful maiden, but Athena changed the Gorgo's lovely hair to frightful snakes. In words attributed to the warrior Perseus, the poet Ovid states, "Her beauty was far famed, and of all her charms her hair was loveliest." Of course, that's the distinguishing attribute of the mother goddess herself. In fact, the separate fragments confirm everything we would expect to find. It was said that the Gorgon was beheaded because she had been willing, quote, to be compared with Athena in beauty. Athena, slighted by her own alter ego, one might say. And so the text reads, Athena, for fitting punishment, transformed the Gorgo's lovely hair to loathsome snakes. And now the goddess, to strike her foes with dread, upon her breastplate wears the snakes she made. Well, that's quite a giveaway of the original story. To preserve the more noble and revered aspects of Athena, the chroniclers set the goddess in opposition to her own terrible aspect. As we shall see in the discourses to follow, this was a pervasive strategy in ancient storytelling, aimed at preserving the integrity of one's own culture while linking the darker side of celebrated mythic personalities to their enemies, often their own cultural neighbors. From this habit, we can learn a lot about both the celestial events and the psychologies at work within the early cultures. The lovely and terrible goddess impacted human history up to a remarkable scale.